Right.
When someone thinks of important parts of our language, their first thought usually isn't adjectives. But adjectives manipulate how we see the world, they manipulate how we view things, and they expose our biases and our passions. Politicians know this, and they use adjectives to manipulate our opinions. That is primarily what I'm going to be talking about today, politicians and their adjective use. But when people think of adjectives, they usually think of only descriptions, but that's not all they're used for. The researchers Swang and Snedeker with the University of Maryland did a study on how children solve ambiguity about objects using adjectives. They would show children a group of coins and have them perform tasks like point at the big coin. They would then measure the children's eye movements in regards to how they looked at the coins and how long it took them to identify the object they were referring to. If the children were still having difficulty, they would introduce another adjective, like point at the big silver coin, and then they would measure this. And while coins are not the same thing as politicians, no matter what pictures may show, this is just an example of how we use adjectives as identifiers. People have been using adjectives as identifiers as a way to identify presidential candidates for a very long time. For example, the 2012 election. Four researchers with the University of Iowa did a study on how the public, via Twitter, perceived the 2012 presidential candidates. Barack Obama was perceived as moderate, intellectually brilliant, and pacifist, while Mitt Romney was perceived as high achievement-driven, Machiavellian, and inflexible. So if someone were talking to you and they referred to the inflexible candidate of the 2012 election, most people's minds would jump to Mitt Romney, where if they referred to the intellectually brilliant candidate, most people would jump to Barack Obama. This is just a small example of how we use identifying adjectives in a real-life setting. The use of identifying adjectives also carried over to the 2016 election. Statista, one of the leading statistic companies on the internet, conducted a survey and asked participants to choose one word to describe Donald Trump. The top answer given was a word similar to stupid or dumb, followed by the words arrogant or crazy. So if someone mentioned the crazy or dumb candidate, many people would think of Donald Trump. Whether this is correct or not, that is up to you. But he's not the only candidate that many people associate certain adjectives with. According to the Washington Post, 1 in 5 people say that Hillary Clinton is dishonest. Another example of identifying adjectives or associating adjectives is the nickname Crooked Hillary. Donald also did this with his other opponent, Ted Cruz, where he called him Lying Ted. He repeats these nicknames over and over as a way to get people to associate these adjectives, like crooked and lying, with his opponents. This use of negative adjectives in association with Hillary Clinton is believed to be one of the reasons she lost the election in the end. But negative adjectives are not as powerful as you may think. James Mark Jones, a psychology professor with the University of Northern Iowa, did a study on how people could recall adjectives. More specifically, how people could recall positive and negative adjectives. He started by describing an anonymous person to his participants using adjectives from a list of positive and negative adjectives. He would then wait a short period to talk to his participants, mainly to get them to forget what he had already told them, before asking them to restate in exact words his description of the anonymous person. And Jones found that positive adjectives were more easily recalled than their negative counterparts. So, when making a choice of what type of connotation you want your adjectives to have, you must figure out your primary goal. And the 2016 presidential candidates knew exactly what they wanted during their speeches. Hillary Clinton primarily uses adjectives with positive connotations when referring to America and to the American people. When speaking in Detroit, she made her views of the city clearly different than the views of Donald Trump. Whereas he spoke of the negative state of the city and of the state, she took on a more positive side of things. She spoke of the new businesses, and she spoke of the workforce, which she included herself in, saying that we are resilient, determined, and hardworking. And she also spoke of the old-fashioned hard work and of the cutting-edge innovation. Clinton made a specific choice to take on a more positive stance, whereas Donald Trump took on a negative one. When speaking of Donald Trump in Reno, Nevada, Hillary Clinton made another specific choice with her adjectives. She spoke of how Donald Trump reinforced harmful stereotypes and how he offered a dog whistle to his most hateful supporters. She spoke of how his actions were a disturbing preview of what kind of president he'd be, and she reminded the audience of his long history of racial discrimination. She could have just talked about how he reinforced stereotypes, and while all stereotypes are harmful, she made a clear point to remind the audience that they were harmful. She spoke about how he offered a dog whistle to his most hateful supporters, showing that he rewarded hate. And she could have just spoke of his history of discrimination, but she made a specific choice to talk about how it was a long history of racial discrimination, which in our day and age, racial discrimination is a very big deal. Her objective when speaking was to highlight the negatives of Donald Trump and hopefully make these words leave lasting impressions on us. But Hillary Clinton is not the only candidate to try this. When speaking, Donald Trump primarily uses adjectives with negative connotations when referring to America and when referring to his opponent, Hillary Clinton. While in Michigan, he spoke about Hillary Clinton. He made sure to bring up her illegal private email server. And while this is technically true, it was illegal. Illegal is still a very strong adjective choice. He could have just said her private email server, and we would have known the one he was talking about. But he made sure to bring up that it was illegal, to leave that lasting impression on us that she is involved with illegal activities while running for president. He spoke about how she was unfit and unqualified to be president. And he mentioned that once the Clintons were in the past, America would open up a bright new chapter. While this one sounds positive, depending on your stance, it can be taken very negatively. While bright new, they both are associated, or they have positive connotations, when he says that once they're in the past, he's saying that we can only get to this once we're through with the Clintons. Donald Trump has a habit of taking adjectives with positive connotations and putting a negative spin on them. During his acceptance speech at the RNC, he spoke not only of Hillary, but also of America's current condition. He commented that America is far less safe and the world is far less stable than it was before Hillary Clinton was in office. He spoke of Clinton's bad instincts and bad judgments, which goes back to how he considered her unfit and unqualified. He then talked about how he visited the laid-off factory workers and the communities crushed by America's horrible and unfair trade deals. Donald Trump was using adjectives to remind the average American of their discontent. He's associated all the negative situations we are facing today with a government that has been in place, which includes Hillary Clinton. In conclusion, looking at James Mark Jones's work, Hillary's adjective use should have been thought of more fondly. That is to say that since she used more positive adjectives, people should have more easily remembered her views and her stances on America and on the issues of today. But while this may be the case since Hillary won the popular vote, it is obvious that language is not the only factor that comes into play when voting, and it should not be. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are both pros when it comes to adjective use, despite someone messing up bigly now and again. But when it comes to elections, specifically presidential elections, adjective use should not sway voters. Thank you.
Good.